When your own children look you in the eye and say, "You're not the boss here anymore," something inside you dies. But what they didn't know was that this old woman still had one last move left, one they'd never forget. My name is Margaret Allen. I'm 68 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought my life was simple. Quiet mornings with coffee, caring for the garden my late husband built, and watching the sun rise over our old oak tree in Asheville, North Carolina. This house, it wasn't just bricks and paint. It was where our love grew, where our children took their first steps, where memories were born and buried. Every room had his laughter. Every corner had my tears. But lately, those rooms had turned into battlegrounds. It started small. My daughter, Rachel, and her husband, Tom, moved in temporarily after he lost his job. I thought I was helping them get back on their feet. But soon, temporary turned into permanent. They began making decisions as if the house was theirs, repainting walls, moving my husband's tools, and modernizing things. I stayed quiet at first, thinking maybe this was my way of showing love, letting them feel at home. But it wasn't about feeling at home. It was about taking over. One evening, I was making dinner, pot roast, the same one my husband used to love, when I heard them whispering in the living room. "She's old, Tom. She can't manage this house forever." "I know. Once we get the paperwork done, she won't even notice." "Paperwork?" My hands froze. What paperwork? I stepped into the room quietly, my heart pounding so hard it felt like the floor was shaking. "Paperwork for what?" I asked. Rachel's face changed instantly. That fake smile she always used when she got caught. "Oh, Mom, it's nothing. Just some financial planning stuff." But Tom couldn't look at me. And in that silence, I knew. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. They started calling family meetings in my own living room. They'd say things like, "Mom, you need to rest more. You shouldn't worry about the bills anymore. We'll handle it." At first, it sounded sweet. But the way they said it, the tone, made me feel like a guest in my own home. One morning, I came downstairs and saw a for sale flyer on the kitchen counter. My own address printed on it. My knees went weak. Rachel walked in, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. "Mom, listen, this place is too much for you. We're thinking of selling it and getting something smaller, maybe near the city." I could barely speak. "We? Rachel, this is my house." She sighed, that condescending sigh I'd heard from her since she turned 16. "Mom, you're not the boss here anymore." The words hit me harder than any slap could. Not the boss? This was the home I built. The home she grew up in. I locked myself in my room that night. For the first time in years, I cried like a child, not because I was weak, but because I finally realized something. Love without respect means nothing. They thought they could take over everything, my home, my decisions, my dignity. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee and stared out the kitchen window at the rose bush my husband planted 25 years ago. He used to say, "Maggie, when people forget your worth, remind them, gently if you can, loudly if you must." And that's when the idea came to me. They wanted control? Fine. But not the way they expected. Because I was about to give this house, the same one they tried to take from me, to someone who actually cared. Someone who knew what gratitude felt like. Someone who had earned it. And that, right there, was the beginning of their biggest lesson. The morning after Rachel told me I was not the boss anymore, something in me shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak anymore. It was clarity. I sat at the dining table with my old photo album, the one with the cracked leather cover and yellowed pages. Each picture told a story of sacrifice, of love, of years spent building a home where everyone was welcome. And now, the people who once called it home wanted to erase me from it. But I wasn't going to fight them with anger. No. I was going to fight them with grace. That afternoon, I put on my old wool coat and walked into town, my first real walk in weeks. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites but wakes you up. As I passed the Willow Creek Community Center, I noticed a familiar face sitting by the entrance, Emily Carter, a young woman who used to mow lawns in our neighborhood. She was maybe 28, with bright, tired eyes and a little boy, Jacob, sitting beside her coloring in a tattered notebook. I hadn't seen her in months. "Emily," I called. She looked up, startled, then smiled politely, though her eyes carried a shadow. "Oh, Mrs. Allen. Hi, how are you?" Something about her tone told me she wasn't fine. We talked for a while, and she finally admitted that she and Jacob had been living in a shelter since she lost her job at the diner. Her voice cracked when she said, "I just want him to have a safe place to sleep. That's all that matters to me." And just like that, my plan found its purpose. When I returned home that evening, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. Rachel and Tom were in the living room, arguing about paint colors again. I just smiled politely, walked past them, and went straight to my office. Inside that drawer was something they never thought I still had, the property deed. I sat down, staring at it, and whispered, "If you want to take something from me, you better pray I haven't already given it away." That night, I called Mr. Bennett, our old family lawyer, a man who had handled my husband's affairs for years. His voice was warm and surprised to hear from me. "Margaret," he said gently, "I didn't expect your call at this hour. What can I do for you?" "I need to make a change to my will," I said firmly. "A big one." The next morning, Rachel noticed I was dressed up and holding my purse. "Where are you going, Mom?" "Oh, just running an errand, dear." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion already creeping in. "Well, you could have told us. You know, so we can help you manage things." I smiled softly. "Don't worry, Rachel. I'm still perfectly capable of handling my own errands." And with that, I walked out the door, my steps steadier than they'd been in years. At Bennett and Moore Law Office, I sat across from Mr. Bennett, sliding the documents toward him. "I want to transfer ownership of my home," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "To whom?" I smiled. "To someone who actually cares." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I see. You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I finally felt peace. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about what I was losing. I was thinking about what someone else would gain. I looked out the window and whispered to my late husband, "You always said this house should be filled with love. Well, it will be again, just not the kind we expected." The next few days were quiet. Rachel and Tom didn't suspect a thing. They were too busy making plans, browsing listings for a smaller modern home near Charlotte. I smiled every time they mentioned our house, because soon they'd find out it was never theirs to claim. A week later, I invited Emily and Jacob over for tea. Jacob ran through the garden, chasing butterflies, his laughter echoing in the same yard where my kids once played. "Mrs. Allen," Emily said, her voice trembling, "this place is beautiful. I can't imagine living somewhere like this." I looked her straight in the eyes and said quietly, "You might not have to imagine it for long." Her teacup froze halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from both heartbreak and healing. "You'll see soon enough." That was the moment everything began. The quiet before the storm. The calm before the truth. Because what I was about to do next would change all our lives forever. A week after that quiet tea in my garden, the calm began to crack. The papers were signed. The transfer was official. The house now belonged to Emily Carter, though no one but Mr. Bennett and I knew that yet. The weight I'd carried for months, of betrayal, of being treated like a guest in my own home, began to lift. But I knew that peace wouldn't last long, because soon Rachel and Tom would discover what I'd done. It started on a Thursday morning. Rachel was pacing the kitchen, holding her phone to her ear. "Mom, the real estate agent said there's an issue with the title. Did you change something?" I looked up from my newspaper and smiled faintly. "An issue?" I said innocently. "I'm not sure what you mean." Tom walked in, already annoyed. "Come on, Margaret. Don't play games. We saw the paperwork last month. We were supposed to finalize the sale this week." I folded the newspaper and set it aside. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed calm.
Oh, that.
Yes, I decided to handle it differently. Rachel frowned. Differently? What do you mean differently? I stood up, my hand steady, even though my pulse wasn't. I gave the house to someone who actually cares. The silence that followed felt like thunder. Tom's face went pale. Rachel blinked as if she hadn't heard me right. You what? I transferred ownership, I said gently. It's no longer mine. Or yours. Rachel's voice cracked, anger rising like wildfire. Mom, please tell me this is some kind of joke. I shook my head slowly.
No, Rachel.
You told me I wasn't the boss anymore. So, I took your advice. Tom slammed his hand on the table. You had no right to do that. I turned to him, meeting his glare with calm eyes. Oh, I had every right. It was my home. My decision. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but not from sadness, from disbelief. Who did you give it to? Some charity? Some stranger? I hesitated for just a second. Then I said softly, her name is Emily Carter. She's a young mother who needed a place for her and her son. They'll be moving in soon. Rachel's jaw dropped. You gave our family home to a stranger? I corrected her quietly.
No, Rachel.
I gave it to someone who knows what gratitude feels like. Someone who won't throw the word temporary at kindness. The argument that followed. I'll never forget. Rachel shouted until her voice broke. Tom stormed out of the kitchen, pacing like a caged animal. But through it all, I didn't raise my voice once. I simply watched as years of unspoken resentment spilled into the open. Theirs and mine. You've lost your mind. We were trying to help you. You're punishing us. No, I thought silently.
I was teaching them.
When the storm finally quieted, Rachel stood at the window, trembling. How could you, Mom? How could you throw us out? I took a deep breath. I didn't throw you out. You pushed yourselves out when you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a burden. That night, they packed their things in silence. Rachel wouldn't meet my eyes. Tom slammed every door he touched. I didn't stop them. I didn't plead. Because love doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. Sometimes, love means stepping aside so they can see what they've lost. The next morning, Emily arrived with little Jacob, carrying a few boxes and a look of disbelief. Mrs. Allen, are you sure about this? She asked softly. I smiled. I've never been more sure of anything. Jacob ran into the yard again, laughing, chasing the same butterflies that once danced around my children. The sound filled the air like music. And for the first time in years, the house felt alive again. Later that day, Rachel came back alone. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She stood at the front door, hesitating. I just came to drop off your mail. I nodded. Thank you. But before she turned to leave, she asked in a trembling voice, Do you hate me, Mom? I looked at her, the little girl I once held, the same one who used to run into my arms after school. And I said softly,
No, sweetheart.
I could never hate you. But I needed you to remember something. Love isn't ownership.
It's respect.
And until you learn that, you'll never really know what home means. She nodded, tears falling freely now, and walked away without another word. As the sun set behind the oak tree that evening, I sat on the porch beside Emily and Jacob, the cool air wrapping around us. The house glowed softly behind us, filled with warmth again. Not because it was mine anymore, but because it finally belonged to someone who understood its heart. And deep down, I knew this was how my husband would have wanted it. The days after Rachel and Tom left were quiet. Too quiet. I kept expecting a call, a knock, something. But silence filled every corner of the house. Even the wind seemed to move softer, as if careful not to disturb the peace I had finally reclaimed. Yet beneath that peace, there was an ache only a mother can understand, the space between doing what's right and doing what still hurts. Every morning, I made my usual cup of coffee and sat by the kitchen window, watching Emily's little boy chase butterflies through the yard. He'd wave at me every time he saw me watching. Sometimes he'd even run up and say, "Hi, Miss Maggie," with a grin that could melt stone. And somehow, that grin began to heal parts of me I didn't know were broken. Emily was careful. She treated the home with more respect than anyone had in years. She asked before touching anything, cleaned the garden, polished the oak floors, and even placed flowers by my husband's old photograph on the mantel. One evening, as she set the flowers down, she said softly, "I never met him, but I feel like he'd be proud of you." Those words hit me deep, because for the first time since losing him, I didn't feel alone in that house. About 2 weeks later, Rachel called. Her number flashing on the phone made my heart skip. I stared at it for a moment before finally answering. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was hesitant, softer than I remembered. "Hello, Rachel," I said gently. "How are you?" She sighed. "We're adjusting. Tom's staying with his brother for now. I'm with a friend near Charlotte." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "I see." There was a pause, long enough for both of us to remember everything that had been said and done. Then she whispered, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." My heart trembled. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words, not because they could erase what happened, but because they proved she finally understood. "I know I was awful," she said, voice breaking. "I got so caught up in wanting control. I forgot what it cost you, what it cost us." Tears welled up in my eyes. "It's all right, Rachel. Sometimes losing something is the only way to see its value." She sniffed softly. "Do you think maybe one day I could come visit?" I smiled through the tears. "You can come visit anytime. The door will always be open, even if the name on the deed isn't mine anymore." Her small laugh on the other end felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Thanks, Mom. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." After that call, something changed again, this time inside me. Forgiveness doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in quiet mornings, small gestures, and the courage to keep loving even after being hurt. So I started living again, really living. I began volunteering at the Willow Creek Center, helping women who'd lost their homes or families. I share my story, not to gain pity, but to remind them that age doesn't make you powerless. Some of them would ask, "Didn't it break your heart to give up your house?" And I'd smile and say, "It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like setting something free." One afternoon, Emily knocked on my door holding an envelope. "Mrs. Allen," she said, "I know this house is ours now, but it'll always be your home too. I want you to keep this." Inside was a house key, polished, tied with a small red ribbon. I stared at it, speechless. "But, Emily," she shook her head, "you gave us shelter when no one else did. This key means you'll never be without one again." I hugged her, tears spilling freely this time. Sometimes, family isn't about blood. It's about who stands beside you when everyone else walks away. That night, I sat by the oak tree with Jacob playing nearby. The sunset spread gold across the sky, the same sky my husband and I once watched together. I whispered, "You were right, John. When people forget your worth, remind them, gently if you can, loudly if you must." I smiled softly. I think I finally did both. A few months passed after I handed the key to Emily and Jacob. The house looked different now, not in its walls or colors, but in its energy. It was alive again. The laughter of a child, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of music playing faintly through the kitchen window, things I hadn't heard here in years. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch, sipping coffee, listening to the rhythm of a home reborn. It wasn't mine anymore, but in every way that mattered, it still was. One Sunday morning, as the church bells rang across Willow Creek, I was planting roses along the fence when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom?" I turned. It was Rachel. She looked different, older, humbled, maybe even lighter. Her hair was tied back, her eyes softer than they'd been in a long time. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, wiping my hands on my apron. For a moment, we just stood there, the air between us heavy with everything unsaid. Then she whispered, "This place looks beautiful. You all look happy." I smiled. "I am." We sat under the oak tree, the same one my husband planted decades ago. Jacob played nearby, giggling as he chased a ball. Rachel watched him, eyes glistening. "Is that the little boy who lives here now?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "His name's Jacob. He reminds me of you when you were that age, curious and kind." Rachel took a deep breath. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I said." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I was so worried about money, about control. I forgot why you built this house in the first place. It wasn't for ownership. It was for family." Her voice broke, and I turned it into something ugly. Tears filled my eyes, but I reached for her hand. "We all lose our way sometimes. What matters is whether we find it again." After a long silence, Rachel looked toward the house and smiled softly. "She seems nice, the woman who lives here." "Emily? She's wonderful," I said. "And she's taught me something. That kindness doesn't end when you give something away. It multiplies." Rachel nodded slowly. "Do you think she'd let me meet her? Maybe help out around here?" My heart swelled. "That's between you and her. But I think she'd be happy to meet you." Later that week, Rachel returned, this time with a basket of homemade muffins. When Emily opened the door, there was a moment of hesitation. Then, as if they both understood something unspoken, they smiled and introduced themselves. From that day on, Rachel began visiting often. She helped Emily with the garden, played with Jacob, and sometimes stayed for dinner. I'd watch from the porch, quietly. The woman my daughter had become was not the same one who once shouted, "You're not the boss here anymore." She had changed, and deep down I knew so had I. One evening, as the sky burned gold, Rachel sat beside me again. She took my hand and whispered, "I used to think power meant control, but now I see real strength is knowing when to let go." I squeezed her hand. "That's the hardest lesson there is." She smiled faintly. "You taught it well." When I went inside that night, Emily had placed something new on the mantel, a framed photo of me, Rachel, her, and little Jacob standing together in the yard. Below it, in delicate cursive, she'd written, "Home isn't where you live. It's who you share your heart with." I stood there for a long time, just staring at that picture. My family, old and new, all under one roof of forgiveness and love. Weeks later, as fall settled in, I often found myself sitting by the window, the world outside glowing orange and gold. Sometimes, I'd see Rachel helping Jacob with his schoolwork. Sometimes, Emily would bring me pie and sit with me while we watched the sunset. And sometimes, when the wind rustled through the oak leaves, I could almost hear my husband's voice, gentle, proud, content. "You did it, Maggie. You gave them all something they'll never forget." I smiled softly. Not revenge, not victory, but peace. The kind that only comes when you finally understand that love, respect, and kindness aren't things you lose when you give them away. They're the very things that make you rich.